My name is Abigail, and I never thought a simple family dinner would expose the devastating truth about my grandfather Larry that would shatter everything I believed about my life. It started on a crisp November evening when my entire extended family gathered at Romano's, this upscale Italian restaurant in downtown Portland that my grandfather had insisted on for his 75th birthday celebration. I should have known something was wrong when Larry made such a big deal about picking the most expensive place in the city, especially since he'd spent the last 3 years constantly reminding me how financially irresponsible I was. I'd been struggling since college, working 2 part-time jobs while trying to launch my graphic design business from my tiny studio apartment. Every family gathering became an interrogation about my finances, with Larry leading the charge. He'd sit there in his perfectly pressed suits, gold watch gleaming, shaking his head at my poor choices and lack of ambition. The rest of my family always nodded along, treating his words like gospel. That night, as we sat around the massive oak table in Romano's private dining room, the familiar ritual began almost immediately. Larry raised his wine glass, the crystal catching the warm light from the chandelier above, and cleared his throat for what I knew would be another lecture disguised as a toast. "Family," he began, his voice carrying that authoritative tone he'd perfected over decades. "It's important we acknowledge both our successes and our disappointments." His pale blue eyes, surrounded by deep wrinkles, found mine across the table. Some of us have built empires through hard work and smart decisions, while others continue to make excuses for their poverty. My cousin Marcus snickered from his seat next to his new BMW keys, which he deliberately placed on the table like a trophy. My Aunt Patricia nodded approvingly while adjusting her designer necklace. Uncle Robert, Larry's eldest son, just stared down at his plate, but I caught him glancing at me with what looked like pity. "Grandpa," I said quietly, my fingers tightening around my cloth napkin. "I'm doing my best with what I have. Starting a business takes time." "Excuses." Larry waved his wrinkled hand dismissively. "Your cousin Marcus here just bought his 3rd property at 28. Your Aunt Patricia's boutique is expanding to a 2nd location. Meanwhile, you're 32 and still living in that shoebox apartment, driving a 15-year-old Honda that sounds like it's dying." The words hit like physical blows. I felt my cheeks burning with embarrassment as everyone around the table remained silent. My younger sister Emma, who'd flown in from Seattle for the dinner, reached over and squeezed my hand under the table, but even she didn't speak up. "I've offered to help her," Larry continued, cutting into his perfectly prepared osso buco, "but she's too proud to accept family guidance. Pride and poverty go hand in hand, I've learned." "What help?" I asked, my voice sharper than intended. "You mean the lectures about how I should have chosen a real career instead of art? Or the suggestion that I marry someone wealthy instead of following my dreams?" Larry's fork paused halfway to his mouth. For just a moment, I saw something flicker in his eyes. Was it guilt? But then his expression hardened into that familiar mask of disappointment. "Dreams don't pay bills, Abigail. At your age, it's time to face reality. Some people are destined for success, others for struggle. The sooner you accept which category you fall into, the better." Uncle Robert shifted uncomfortably in his chair, finally speaking up. "Dad, maybe we could discuss this later." "No," Larry interrupted, his voice rising slightly. "This family needs to understand the consequences of poor decision-making. Abigail is a perfect example of what happens when someone refuses to listen to wisdom." He gestured around the opulent private dining room with its oil paintings and crystal fixtures. "I built my wealth through discipline and sacrifice. I earned every dollar in my accounts, every property in my portfolio. Success isn't luck, it's choice." Something in his tone made my stomach twist. The way he emphasized my accounts and my portfolio struck me as odd, almost defensive. I'd never really questioned where Larry's money came from. He'd always been wealthy in my memory, living in that massive colonial house on Hillside Drive, taking elaborate vacations, showering the family with expensive gifts, while simultaneously berating me for my financial struggles. "What exactly did you build, Grandpa?" I asked, surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. "I mean, specifically. You've never really talked about your business in detail." The room fell silent, except for the soft classical music playing through hidden speakers. Larry's jaw tightened, and he set down his fork with deliberate precision. "Real estate," he said curtly. "Investment properties. Things you wouldn't understand." "Try me," I pressed, something instinctive driving me forward despite the warning looks from around the table. "I'm starting my own business. I'd love to learn from your experience." Marcus laughed uncomfortably. "Abigail, come on. Don't interrogate Grandpa on his birthday." But I noticed something else. Uncle Robert was staring at his father with an expression I'd never seen before. It wasn't the usual admiration or respect. It was something closer to fear. Larry picked up his wine glass and took a long sip, clearly buying time. "It's complicated, Abigail. Portfolio management, leveraged investments, things that require years of experience to understand." "When did you start?" I asked. "What was your first property?" "Enough questions," Larry snapped, his composure finally cracking. "This is supposed to be a celebration, not an interrogation." The waiter chose that moment to refill our water glasses, and as he approached our table, something extraordinary happened. His face lit up with genuine surprise and delight when he saw me. "Miss Henderson," he exclaimed, his Italian accent warm with recognition. "Welcome back. Mr. Romano will be so pleased to see you again." I stared at him blankly. "I'm sorry. I think you have me confused with someone else. This is my first time at Romano's." The waiter, Giuseppe according to his name tag, looked puzzled for a moment. Then his eyes widened with understanding. "Ah, forgive me. You look exactly like the lady in the photograph in Mr. Romano's office. The one who—" He stopped abruptly, glancing around the table at the confused faces. "I should get the manager." "No, wait," I said, my heart beginning to race. "What photograph? What lady?" But Giuseppe was already backing away, clearly flustered by his mistake. "I'll get Mr. Romano. Un momento." The table erupted in confused murmurs, but I was watching Larry. All the color had drained from his weathered face, and his hands were trembling slightly as he reached for his water glass. Uncle Robert was now staring at his father with undisguised alarm. "What's going on, Dad?" my Aunt Patricia asked, her perfectly manicured fingers toying nervously with her necklace. Before Larry could answer, a distinguished man in an expensive suit approached our table. He was tall and silver-haired, with kind brown eyes that held a mixture of confusion and something else, recognition. "I am Vincent Romano," he said in accented English, his gaze moving from face to face before settling on me. "Giuseppe tells me there is some confusion." His eyes studied my features intently. "You are very much like her, yes. Very much like Elena." "Elena?" I repeated, the name foreign on my tongue. "Who's Elena?" Mr. Romano's expression grew cautious as he glanced around the table. "Perhaps this is not the right time." "Please," I interrupted, standing up despite my trembling legs. "Who is Elena? Why do I look like her?" Mr. Romano sighed deeply, his eyes filled with an old sadness. "Elena Henderson she was the original owner of Romano's, my business partner for 12 years until—" He paused, studying Larry, who had gone completely rigid in his chair. "Until her family told me she had died in a car accident in 2011. The words hit the table like a bomb. My Aunt Patricia gasped audibly. Emma grabbed my arm so tightly it hurt, but all I could focus on was the name. Henderson. My last name. "That's impossible," Uncle Robert said, his voice barely a whisper. "Our mother died when I was 16. That was 1998. Mr. Romano shook his head slowly. No. Elena Henderson, your mother. She was very much alive in 2011. She came here every week, sometimes twice a week. We were partners in expanding the restaurant chain. She had big dreams, that woman, always talking about her children, her grandchildren." His eyes found mine again. "Especially you, Abigail. She spoke of you constantly, showed me pictures. You have her eyes, her smile." The room began to spin. I gripped the back of my chair, trying to process what I was hearing. That can't be right. My grandmother died when I was 19. I remember the funeral. "Whose funeral did you attend?" Mr. Romano asked gently. I opened my mouth to answer, but realized I couldn't remember clearly. The memories were vague, fragmented. I remembered being sad. I remembered Larry comforting me, telling me Grandma Elena was in a better place now. But the actual funeral, I couldn't picture it. Couldn't remember a casket, a service, anything concrete. "Where?" My voice came out as a croak. I cleared my throat and tried again. "Where is Elena now?" Mr. Romano's expression grew troubled. "I don't know. In late 2011, she stopped coming to the restaurant. When I called her house, Your grandfather answered and told me she had died in a car accident. He said the family was too grief-stricken to discuss business matters and asked me not to contact them again. He looked directly at Larry, who was now staring at his hands. I respected the family's wishes and grieved my dear friend and partner alone. Uncle Robert suddenly slammed his hand on the table, making everyone jump. "Dad," he said, his voice shaking with emotion. "What did you do?" Larry's head snapped up, his eyes wild. "I protected this family. I protected you all from her schemes and her debts." "What debts?" I demanded, my own voice rising. "What schemes?" "She was going to lose everything," Larry shouted, abandoning all pretense now. "The house, the investments, everything I'd worked for. She was pouring money into these ridiculous restaurant ventures, making promises to people like him." He jabbed a finger at Mr. Romano. "She would have bankrupted us all." The truth was crystallizing in my mind like pieces of a horrible puzzle falling into place. "You stole from her," I said, the words coming out flat and cold. "You stole her money and told everyone she was dead." "I saved it," Larry protested. "I invested it properly. Look where we are now, successful, wealthy, secure. If I'd let her continue with her foolish dreams, we'd all be living in poverty." Mr. Romano stepped forward, his face grave. "Mr. Larry, Elena's share of Romano's has been generating profits for 13 years. According to our partnership agreement, her portion should have gone to her heirs upon her death. But since she's apparently still alive," he trailed off, the implications hanging heavy in the air. "How much?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Mr. Romano glanced at Larry, then back at me. "Her initial investment was $50,000 in 1999. With profits, expansion, and compound interest over 24 years. He paused to calculate. Her stake in the Romano's chain would be worth approximately $2.8 million today. The number hit me like a physical blow. I sank back into my chair, my legs unable to support me. $2.8 million. While I'd been struggling to pay rent, eating ramen noodles for dinner, working 60-hour weeks just to survive, there was nearly $3 million that rightfully belonged to my grandmother. Money that should have been helping me, helping all of us. "Where is she?" I whispered. "Where is my grandmother?" Larry's face crumpled. For the first time in my life, I saw him look truly old, truly defeated. "Shady Pines," he admitted. "Shady Pines Memory Care Facility in Beaverton. She has Alzheimer's. Has had it for years now." Uncle Robert stood up so violently his chair fell backward. "You put Mom in a nursing home and told us she was dead? For 13 years? She doesn't remember any of us anyway," Larry shouted defensively. "The disease took her mind years ago. She's been gone in every way that matters." "That wasn't your decision to make," I screamed, surprising myself with the force of my rage. "She's my grandmother. She's their mother. You stole her life, her money, her family." Emma was crying openly now, mascara streaming down her cheeks. Aunt Patricia looked like she might faint. Marcus had gone completely silent, his face pale with shock. Mr. Romano cleared his throat diplomatically. "Perhaps," he said carefully, "it would be best if I gave you my card. When you've had time to process this information, we should discuss the legal implications. Elena's ownership stake in Romano's, the accumulated profits, the power of attorney situation." He pulled out an elegant business card and placed it on the table in front of me. "I am very sorry for your family's pain. Elena was a wonderful woman who spoke of all of you with such love." As Mr. Romano withdrew, the table sat in stunned silence. The festive atmosphere had evaporated completely, replaced by the heavy weight of betrayal and revelation. Larry sat hunched in his chair, looking every one of his 75 years. "The house," Uncle Robert said suddenly, his voice hollow. "The investments, the cars, the vacations. How much of it came from Mom's money?" Larry didn't answer, but his silence was answer enough. I stood up, my movements mechanical. "I'm going to see her. Tonight. Abigail." "Visiting hours are probably over," Emma started. "I don't care," I interrupted. "I'm going to see my grandmother who I thought was dead. I'm going to sit with her even if she doesn't remember me. And tomorrow I'm calling a lawyer." Larry finally looked up, his eyes pleading. "Abigail, please. I know this looks bad, but I was trying to protect the family. Your grandmother's condition. Seeing her like that would have destroyed you all. I thought it was kinder." "Kinder?" I laughed, the sound bitter and sharp. Kinder to steal her money and use it to fund your lifestyle while lecturing me about being poor? Kinder to deprive her of visits from her children and grandchildren in her final years? Kinder to let her die alone in a nursing home while we all thought she was already dead? I grabbed my purse and coat, my hands shaking with adrenaline and rage. For the record, Larry, I'm not poor because I make bad decisions. I'm poor because my grandfather is a thief who stole my inheritance and used it to fund his superiority complex. As I headed toward the exit, I heard Uncle Robert's voice behind me, low and dangerous. Dad, you're going to fix this. All of it. And then you're going to pray that Mom forgives you, because I'm not sure the rest of us ever will. The drive to Shady Pines took 45 minutes through the dark Portland streets. I called ahead, and while they confirmed that visiting hours were over, the night nurse agreed to make an exception when I explained the situation. The facility was a pleasant-looking building with warm lighting and well-maintained gardens, nothing like the grim institutional setting I'd imagined. Elena Henderson was in room 214, according to the gentle nurse who led me down the carpeted hallway. She has good days and difficult days, the nurse explained quietly. Tonight she's been quite alert. She was asking about her daughter earlier. Patricia, I think. My heart clenched. She remembers my aunt? Sometimes. Alzheimer's is unpredictable. She might remember Patricia from 40 years ago, but not recognize a nurse she's seen every day for months. The nurse knocked softly on the door, then pushed it open. Elena, you have a visitor. The woman sitting in the chair by the window was smaller than I remembered. Her once dark hair now silver white and styled in a soft bob. But her eyes were exactly like mine, the same deep brown with gold flecks. She looked up as I entered, and for a moment I saw a flicker of recognition cross her face. Abigail? She said uncertainly. My little Abigail? I couldn't speak. Tears were streaming down my face as I approached her chair. She reached out with trembling hands, and I took them in mine. Her skin was soft and warm, very real, very alive. Grandma, I managed to whisper. I thought you were dead. We all thought you were dead. Her brow furrowed in confusion. Dead? No, sweetheart. I'm right here, though sometimes I feel like I'm disappearing a little more each day. She studied my face with those familiar eyes. You look so sad. What's wrong? I spent the next 2 hours sitting with her, holding her hands, listening to her stories that jumped between decades. Sometimes she thought I was 7 years old, asking about school and my art projects. Sometimes she knew I was an adult, asking about my business and whether I'd found someone to love. And sometimes, in heartbreaking moments of clarity, she remembered that something was wrong. I haven't seen my children in so long, she said during one of these clear moments. Robert used to visit every week, and Patricia would bring the grandchildren. But then, she trailed off, looking confused and hurt. Larry said they were too busy. He said they'd moved away. They didn't move away, Grandma, I said gently. They just didn't know where you were. When I finally left Shady Pines that night, I had a plan. I drove straight to a 24-hour copy center and spent the remainder of the night researching elder abuse laws, financial fraud statutes, and estate planning attorneys. By sunrise, I had compiled a folder of evidence and legal precedents. The first call I made was to the best elder law attorney in Portland. The second was to Emma, asking her to bring Uncle Robert and Aunt Patricia to Shady Pines that afternoon. The third was to the Oregon Department of Human Services to report suspected financial abuse of an elderly person. But the most important call I made was to Mr. Romano. I want to know everything about my grandmother's business partnership with you, I said when he answered. Every detail, every document, every conversation you remember. And I want to know if you'd be interested in having a new business partner. Miss Henderson, Mr. Romano said warmly. It would be my honor to work with Elena's granddaughter. She always said you had her entrepreneurial spirit. Over the following weeks, the truth unraveled completely. Larry had been forging Elena's signature for years, redirecting her mail, and using power of attorney documents that were never legally valid, since Elena had never been declared mentally incompetent by a court. He'd stolen not just her share of Romano's, but also the proceeds from the sale of several properties she'd owned, Social Security payments, and dividend payments from various investments. The total amount of theft exceeded $4 million. The family gathering that had started with Larry's birthday celebration ended with his arrest 3 weeks later. Uncle Robert, who had unknowingly benefited from his mother's stolen money, immediately liquidated his assets to begin repaying her. Aunt Patricia did the same, though Marcus chose to fight the restitution in court. As for me, I moved into a larger apartment within walking distance of Shady Pines. Every evening after work, I would visit Elena, reading to her from the business plans for our expanded restaurant chain. On her good days, she would offer suggestions and share memories of her original dreams for Romano's. On her difficult days, I would simply hold her hand and tell her about my graphic design projects, which she always listened to with pride, even when she didn't fully understand who I was. The day I signed the partnership agreement with Mr. Romano, officially becoming a part owner of Romano's restaurants, Elena was having one of her clearest days in weeks. When I told her about the legal victory and the restored business partnership, she smiled with a satisfaction I recognized from my childhood. "I always knew you'd understand," she said, squeezing my hand with surprising strength. "Family isn't about blood or money, sweetheart. It's about who shows up when showing up matters." Larry spent 18 months in minimum security prison for elder abuse and fraud. When he was released, he found that his own children had sold his house and liquidated his assets to continue paying restitution to their mother. He moved into a small apartment and took a job at a hardware store, earning minimum wage for the first time in decades. The money couldn't buy back the 13 years Elena had spent believing her family had abandoned her, but it did ensure she could spend her remaining time in comfort, surrounded by people who genuinely cared for her well-being rather than her bank account. I kept working on my graphic design business, but now it was funded properly and growing rapidly. The income from Romano's gave me the financial security to take creative risks and pursue larger clients. Ironically, Larry's constant criticism about my unrealistic career choice had motivated me to prove him wrong in ways he never anticipated. The most profound change, though, was in our family dynamics. Emma moved back to Portland to be closer to Elena. Uncle Robert started therapy to process the guilt and betrayal he felt about unknowingly benefiting from his mother's stolen money. Aunt Patricia began volunteering with elder abuse advocacy groups, and I learned that real wealth isn't measured in bank balances or property portfolios. It's measured in relationships based on truth, dignity, and genuine care for one another's well-being. The last time I saw Larry was 6 months after his release from prison. I was leaving Shady Pines after my evening visit with Elena when I found him sitting in his old, dented car in the parking lot, staring up at the building. When he saw me, he rolled down his window. "How is she?" he asked, his voice hoarse and small. "She's dying," I said simply, peacefully, surrounded by people who love her, the way everyone deserves to die. He nodded, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. "I was wrong," he whispered, "about everything, about what matters, about what makes a person successful." I looked at this broken man, who had once loomed so large and threatening in my life, and I felt something I didn't expect. Pity. "She forgave you," I told him, which was true. In one of her lucid moments, Elena had specifically asked me to tell Larry she harbored no resentment. But forgiveness doesn't erase consequences, and love doesn't justify theft. Elena passed away peacefully on a Tuesday morning in spring, with me holding one hand and Uncle Robert holding the other. Her last coherent words were about the smell of fresh basil from the herb garden outside her window, and how it reminded her of the kitchen at Romano's on busy Saturday nights. At her funeral, her real funeral, attended by the family she'd never actually left, Mr. Romano delivered a eulogy about the importance of holding on to our dreams, even when others dismiss them as foolish. Uncle Robert spoke about the courage it takes to rebuild relationships after betrayal. Emma read a poem about the power of showing up for the people we love. I didn't speak at the service. Instead, I stood beside the casket and silently promised Elena that I would use her legacy, both financial and personal, to build something meaningful. The expanded Romano's chain now includes a foundation that provides business loans to young entrepreneurs whose families don't believe in their dreams. Every rejection letter goes through my desk first, and I personally meet with every applicant who reminds me of myself, broke, talented, and dismissed by the people who should be supporting them. Elena's money has helped launch 43 small businesses in the past 2 years, from food trucks to art studios to tech startups. But perhaps the most important thing I learned from this entire experience is that being called poor by someone who has stolen your inheritance isn't an insult. It's a projection of their own moral bankruptcy. True poverty isn't about money. It's about lacking the integrity, courage, and love that make life worth living. Larry died alone in his apartment 2 years later. I attended his funeral out of respect for Uncle Robert and Aunt Patricia, but I felt no sadness at his passing. He had chosen wealth over family, control over love, and deception over truth. In the end, despite all his lectures about success and failure, he died the poorest man I'd ever known. Do you think I was right to pursue legal action against my grandfather, even though it tore our family apart? Please subscribe to our channel if this story resonated with you. And let me know in the comments what city or country you're watching from. I love hearing from viewers around the world. Thank you for listening to my story about learning the difference between being poor in money and being poor in character.